we're about to finish a big chunk of topics, no? Which is the introduction to history of computing. So I would like to announce our first formative test. Our tentative schedule will be 25 and 26, no? 25 and 26. Now, by next Thursday, I'm going to give you a practice test so that have you can use it to study for the actual test. The actual test maybe I think 50 or 100 items, depends on how many questions I can form, no? And the practice test maybe 10 to 15 items. Okay, you will have the practice test over the weekend, and then the actual formative test will be on August 25 and 26. Okay, it will be timed, no? I think you will be given about 3 hours. You can take it anytime you're free. You'll be given 3 hours to finish the test, no? If you are not able to finish it
First.
because you're no you're I'll be online now, because you can chat me, no, in Zoom. I'll keep my Zoom online the whole day, so you can chat me if you're cut off, so I can extend your time, no? Anyo. Anybody else? Save this first. Okay, so last meeting I've given you an assignment, no? Then so these are the last few topics. We will answer the assignment and we'll take up more stories, no, in the history of computing part. And then the others which we cannot finish, whatever we cannot finish, you just read through. There's so few of them already, no? Like the brief history of the internet, history of the internet and the World Wide Web, no? Then the history of IBM PC parts 1 and 2, the history of the computer monitor. You can read them yourselves, no? These are very self-explanatory, no? And self-enriching materials, no? Which I have collected from the web. Okay, so for the moment, I'd like to show you the solution, no? Which I have done on the assignment for the PDP1, which is average, right? You're supposed to compute the average. Very easy, no? Anyway, let's just go through it anyway, no? I've included it in the factorial. Okay, let me just erase this from the scratch. Okay, erase na lang natin from scratch so that we can show how it's going to be patterned after the factorial program, because the difference between factorial and averaging is, in factorial you use multiplication, in averaging you use what you use addition. Okay, do you follow? This is the PDP1. Okay, so we'll just translate it again, no? So let me erase everything up. This is much easier because we know there's no more jump left and jump right. You follow? Wala na tayong jump left and jump right. Okay, so this is the factorial program, so we will change the mul into a plus. But before that, no, the biggest problem when you are computing average is you will lose your final divisor. Remember, you are going to divide later after doing a summation. You're going to divide your answer with the original number, no? So, but the original number is gone at the end. This is now our partial sum instead of our partial product, and this is now our next addend. Okay, do you follow? So we are going to store, no? We are going to store our final divisor in M of 4. Dito sa M of 4. Do you follow? So dito sa this, we will now use variable 4, no, in memory. Okay, do you follow? And then so this is no longer a jump 4, no, we'll change that later, but we are going to add one more line because we are going to save, no, our divisor here, no? So yeah, extend natin ito, and then this will not just be our whole, will install because we are going to divide our final sum here at this point, and maybe store it to the accumulator. Do you follow? So the logic is becoming very clear, no? So anyway, so yeah. So our next addend, we will just compute, no? So first, we load the accumulator. So this, LAC1, the accumulator becomes 3. Do you follow? LAC, that's load accumulator. Now, previously we had load, right? But they have changed the syntax, no? In deck PDP1. So we are going to store this right away. So we'll say DAC4. So DAC4 is the equivalent of store, no? So this will have M of 4 is the accumulator, because 4, remember, is our final divisor. So we'll store it here so that it isn't destroyed as we go along the computation. Okay, we'll just keep it in memory, no? And sub 2, we are going to compute the next. This is our partial, no? Partial sum. Okay. This is our next addend. This is our final divisor. Can you see that? Can you see everything on screen? I hope you can see everything on screen. Huh? I don't need to enlarge because enlarging it further will give me lesser space. Okay. So anyway, we are ready to do that. Sub 2, which will now allow us to compute the next addend. No? So this becomes, the actual content is 3 minus 1 because the accumulator is 3 and the value of M of 2 is 1. Okay, what happened to this? No, I'm sorry, the format is date. So just set this to number. Yeah. I'm sorry because I did not code. This, the actual content will be 3 minus 1. Okay. I should code. So okay. Let's just change the alignment. Okay. 3 minus 1. Do you follow? Sub 2 means we are going to subtract the accumulator by the value in memory 2. So the accumulator becomes 2. Okay. And we are going to store it to M3 because this will be our next addend. So yeah, our next addend now becomes 3. Or rather 2. I'm sorry, no? 2 is transferred here. Now we go into the loop, the head of the loop. We load the first partial sum. Okay. LAC 1. 1 is here is 3. So we will have the accumulator as 3. Do you follow? Okay. Any questions? If you have questions, you chat me. No? Okay, so I will just stop. Okay. LAC1. So the accumulator is now 3. We will where's that? Where are we? Dito tayo, no? The deposit accumulator is 2. Okay. LAC1. We are going to load the accumulator. Mali yung nilagyan ko dito dapat. So LAC becomes, the accumulator becomes 3. Now instead of a mole, we are going to add because this is now summation. Okay. Okay, add 3. So this becomes 3 plus 2 because currently the variable 3 contains 2. Okay. And then 3 plus 2 equals 5. And then we deposit it to 1. Doc 1. Deposit accumulator to 1. So this now becomes 5. Okay. Which is our first partial sum. Next partial sum. Okay. Any questions so far? Let me proceed. No. LAC 3. So load the accumulator, which is 3, which is our next addend. This is it. 2. So we'll now load the accumulator with 3. This is 2. Okay. And then sub 2. So this becomes 2 minus 1. Okay. So this becomes 1. Okay. Deposit accumulator. Deposit 3. So this becomes 1 here. Okay. We follow? 1. And then we do a skip 0 accumulator. SZA. Skip 0 accumulator. The value of the accumulator is 0. Is 1. Is it 0? No. So therefore we will not skip. We will proceed to, we will just repeat. No? Now when we repeat, we will have 5 plus 1 later. I'm not going to repeat it step by step because you know the process already. No? right? Do you follow? So it will be, we will have 5 plus 1. So this the accumulator will finally become 6. Do you follow? And the partial sum will become 6. And the accumulator, when we say 1 minus 1, will become 0. Right? So at that point, when it becomes the accumulator becomes 0, CSA will skip. Okay? It will skip to 17. Okay? 17. This is not a jump 7, but this is now a jump 9. No? Jump 9 na kasi sa 9 na tayo mag-jump. The head of our loop is now 9 because we have added two things, a constant and another deposit. So jump 9. Do you follow? Because our head of our loop is now 9. Any questions? No? So eventually now we will skip. So in 17, what will we have in 17? This is not halt. Okay, but we are going to load the accumulator LAC 1. Okay, LAC 1, I don't know what happened. Ayaw niya mag-ano ng space. Maybe there's something wrong. So anyway, this will become 6. Okay, and we'll say div 4 this time, no? Ayaw talaga. Maybe it's because I don't have a, I should have a div 4. Okay, do you follow? Div 4. What is 4? So this becomes 6. The value at 4 is untouched, no? So it is 3. So we'll have to this is the code 6 divided by 3. Okay. This is now 18. Okay. They follow, so this becomes 2. And we can store the final answer. Okay, we can store the final answer. We can DAC. Let's call this DAC. Tayo mag-space. There's something wrong with my keyboard. Okay. DAC 1. So this becomes 6 divided by 2, which is 3. And now in 20, we can now have jump 20. So this is now our call. Okay. Any questions so far? So very self-explanatory. No? You master the logic. Okay. Accumulation and summation. Any questions so far? Any questions? Okay, where are we? Nandito na tayo sa, we have read the story of ENIAC, no? And then we have the generations. We look at the generations of computer. From 1940 to 1956, this is the first generation of computers. These are mostly William tubes, made of vacuum tubes, no? Or William tubes. Let's look at William tubes. No? How does it look like? These are called Williams. They are small vacuum tubes. No? These are not the same vacuum tubes that you have in your old TV, no, which are very large. Okay, so what you have here is an image. Ito. We don't have that image. What you have here, these are, no? Bakit tayo mag-open? Open image. This. So this is a William tube. Look at that. They're very small vacuum tubes, no? They're very small vacuum tubes, which can fit in a much smaller space than an original vacuum tube. But they're still made of glass and filament, which means that when it lights, it's on. When it does not light, it's off. You follow? These are actually transistors, vacuum tube transistors, or otherwise called as relays. No? Relays. They will store either, they can store binary values. No? The problem with this is they are still large. No? That's why computers in the old times are very big, because they occupy much space. No? The devices that made them occupy a lot of space, and they are usually very hot. So you have a lot of air conditioning or whatever, no, to keep these things cool. Otherwise, they will just blow up like a light bulb that's overheating. Do you follow? So yeah, these are the first generation of computers. They are made of Williams vacuum tubes. Okay, made by Williams. Okay, Williams Kilburn. ENIAC, vacuum tubes, no? IAS, vacuum tubes. EDVAC, which is 1949, although 1950, so yeah. EDVAC is also made of vacuum tubes. UNIVAC may partly be, no, transistorized, no? Okay. And IBM computers, in particular, the IBM computers which we have discussed, no? 701, 704, 709, okay, are vacuum tube transistors, no? They are usually very large computers. I'd like to look at our our chronology so that we can look which computer from IBM and from DEC are first generation and second generation and the rest. No? However, no, DEC computers were not first generation. They started in the second generation of computers. So 1960 na. 1960 is the start of the second generation of computers. Hello? Okay. So ito. Because the first generation is from 1940 to 1956. Okay, remember that 1952 is the introduction of IAS. No? We follow, although it was first conceived in 1946. Okay. So if you look at all IBM computers, the first computers from 1953 nagsimula ang IBM, no? It started. Okay. To 1958, the 709. These are vacuum tube computers. But in 1959 and 1960, transistors came about. So PDP was already made of transistors. Okay, transistors. Let's look at what a transistor is. So if you look at transistors, it's like this. Now they're the equivalent of vacuum tubes, vacuum tube, Williams vacuum tubes. If you look at some transistors, some of them are circular, some of them are rectangular or square type. No? The earlier versions are circular, so that they can fit into the slot for the Williams tubes. Okay, so because the first attempts were to replace the Williams tubes with solid state transistors. Okay. Solid ito. These are made of solid material, semiconductors, no? Now, the Williams tubes were made of filaments. So which means that they're more sensitive and they are hotter. However, this one, the transistors are cooler, okay, and they're smaller. Okay? They are smaller. So the original transistors were made circular so they can fit into the Williams tube socket. But later, no, to conserve more space, transistors became rectangular. Okay, but they still have the 3 feet. No? Even Williams tubes have 3 feet because they are relays. No? So merong mga half moon, no? They're half moon because that's the evolution of transistors. They were first designed to fit into Williams tubes. Okay. So ganun. So that so by 1960. Okay. By the way, the transistor was invented earlier than 1960. Let's look at that. No? Transistors, no? 1960 yung cut-off natin, no? Basta 1940 to 1959, these are first generation computers. Okay. 1955, I'm sorry. No? The second transistors came in 1955, 1956. So remember 1959 yung yung DEC. So, okay. In 1948, the semiconductor was invented by William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain from Bell Laboratories. Bell Labs is now called AT&T. No? They invented a solid state transistor, the transistor which we're just looking at, these transistors. And then by 1954, Sony started making transistorized TVs. Okay, mga TV transistorized na. Texas Instruments made transistorized portable radios. No? So, yung transistor radio, they were introduced in 1954 by, have you seen a transistor radio? Okay. I used to have them myself. No? Transistor radio. There's no other radio by then. No? Oh, yan, it's a transistor radio. You have this? Have you seen this? If you have something like this, you give it to me. This is worth a fortune, no? Okay. The original ones, especially a Sony. No? This is an antique, you know, especially a Sony transistor radio. Like that. You should keep it because it's an it's worth a fortune, okay? It's an antique. It should be part of your antique collection. Okay? Produced transistors came to dominate the market. So there are TVs already. No? Now, by 1959, no, when transistorized computers became popular, no, Kilby of Texas Instruments, remember they made transistor radios, invented the IC or the integrated circuit. Okay. So DEC PDP1, no, these are the DEC computers from 1959 to 1963. So ito hanggang 1963, which is DEC PDP7. No? DEC PDP7 is now made of ICs. No? Okay? And then the IBM computers 360, yung 709, yung mga 701, remember, are vacuum tubes. 701, 702, 703, 704. And then the 7030, the stretch, which was used to replace the 709, is actually transistorized. No? Because from 1960, computers are then made of transistors. No? So remember, from 1956 to 1963, 1940 to 1945, first generation, 1955, second generation. Okay. Do you follow? Okay. Although 1963 last, but 1954 the IC was already, 1959 the IC was already invented. Okay. So that PDP1, the first computer that runs a game, okay, it's called Space War. It's also the first computer which has a CRT display. So 1960s, no? 1960s pala yung Sony TVs, no? Sony TVs were replaced with transistor TVs. No? PDP4, no? Remember, is PDP7 yung nag-iba na talaga, no? PDP4 is a transistorized mini computer. Okay, do you follow? No? We have seen this in the, no? And then 709 is the last. I'm not sure, no, but the 701 to 705 is vacuum tube, but the 7090, no, these are, okay, 709, no, 709 and the 7090 are transistorized versions of 701, the earlier 7 computers. We follow, this is to 1963. Dating dito sa 1963, oh, because by 1964, by 1965, a different generation came. It's the generation of integrated ICs, no? Or rather integrated circuits. Now, ito yung IC, no? Integrated circuit. If you have seen this, no, several transistors can fit into this, no? So this is now the third generation. In the third generation, a whole processor can fit into the IC, which means you can have an ALU or a control unit or both of them, no? An ALU, an arithmetic logic unit, yung the mill, remember? The arithmetic logic unit and the control unit can fit into an IC. Do you follow? Do you follow? In fact, no, one version is 8008. 8008 is made by Intel. Let's make Intel. I'm not sure if, look at that, no? Intel is already the 808 is not it's already a microprocessor, no? Look at that, no? Meron na siyang mga ano. Meron na siyang 8008. So 8008 is not a third generation. It's a fourth generation IC. No? Walang ito kasi, oh, you can see, no? There's an ALU. Okay, there's a counter. There's a bus, there's a data bus, there's a decoder, but there's no control unit, however, no? So it's not a full-blown microprocessor. It's not a full-blown microprocessor. Okay? Okay. You follow? 1963, no, transistorized, because from 1963 above came the IC. 1965 to 1971, that's the actual, ano? The IC, no? Okay? Integrated circuit. Okay? Integrated circuit. So which means that the processor, the ALU, look at this, no? The ALU can fit inside, no? So many transistors can fit inside, no? Do you follow? The Zilog C80, can you look at that? Is it how do you distinguish a microprocessor from an ordinary IC? Wala siyang nakalagay, no? Ito. The Zilog Z80 is a microprocessor. But the Intel 8008 is an IC which is not yet a full-blown. For me, it's not a full-blown microprocessor because it doesn't have a control unit. But it can be considered a microprocessor because it has registers inside. Intel 4004, let's look at that. No? How are they different? 4004. These are the microprocessors used in calculators. Okay? Ito yung laman niya sa loob, no? Imagine you have that. Okay? So, there's no label, no? What's inside. However, no? The Intel 4004, I'm not sure if it's a microprocessor, but okay, if it doesn't have registers, it's not a microprocessor, okay? Are there gold materials? Let's look at that, no? Gold in microprocessors. There should be, no, but it's not enough to sell. There are gold in the old microprocessors. Okay. There used to be gold in the CPUs. Okay, there used to be, but now I'm not sure. No, there's gold. Okay. So yeah, so ICs, no. Okay, wala na yung aking ano. So ICs na by the third generation. Okay. Ito mga microprocessors by 1965 to 1965 is still 1965 to 1971 ICs na. Do you follow? Integrated circuits. So these are 1965, no? So makita mo itong IBM S360 and 370. These are computers, and even the last PDP are made of integrated circuits. PDP7 is the first PDP which is made of integrated circuits. Do you follow? Because the next generation is the generation of microcomputers, okay, from 1971 to 1980. Now, the later versions are very large scale integrated circuit. Large scale kasi a microprocessor is a large scale integrated circuit. Do you follow? What's the distinction? A microprocessor has everything. No? Let's look at the Intel Intel 8080. This is a microprocessor. 8085 or 8086 is a wala tayong image. Do you have an image? What's inside? Ang liit-liit. Walang label yung image. Okay? Inside the chip, it's a complete set. There's an ALU, there's a control unit, there's an accumulator register, there's a multiplex. So the registers are inside the IC. That's what a microprocessor is. No? Unlike in a previous IC, the registers are in the motherboard outside the packaging. Do you follow? Do you follow? No? When you say a microprocessor, it has the ALU and the control unit and the set of registers inside. So it saves a lot of space, okay, in the motherboard. So devices become smaller because there are more devices which can fit into an IC. So 1970 to 1980, a microprocessor is a large-scale integrated circuit. 1980 above, it's very large scale. Now we have very large scale. You have huge scale ICs. Because modern processors, let's look at the Intel Core i3. It's no longer rectangular. It's now square, no? Pentium na lang. Okay. Hindi natin makita yan sa Pentium 2. Let's look at it. Yes, ito. Intel Pentium. What's inside? Yeah. Everything is inside. No? Even the multimedia processing, like processing of videos and graphics, it's already there inside the Pentium or in the Core i3. Okay, we cannot have a schematic diagram of what's inside, but it's a very large thing. You know, there's so many things inside, not just the CPU, the control unit, but even the cache. No, so ito no, even the cache is inside. Okay, the decoder, okay, the ALU, no, so many ALUs. No, the cache is inside. The very large scale integrated, the large, the huge scale, no? The very large scale integrated circuit. So there's a memory inside it, no? There's an MMX, no? Multimedia extension, processor. Do you follow? So what distinguishes a very large scale from an ordinary microprocessor is there are more processors inside. Okay, there are more processors inside, no? Multi-processors inside the chip. Okay, that's that started from 1980 patas, no? 1980 patas is very large scale. Okay, nowadays we don't distinguish between very large scale and then we are now in the last generation where we no longer measure the devices inside. No? Nowadays, your motherboard will be very small because everything is on the processor. Okay, everything is on the processor except perhaps, no, the VGA, no, the VGA na lang ang wala, but there are processors that have VGA, like the what I have, no, in my laptop, the Ryzen, no, 5. It has the processor, the VGA inside the Ryzen chip. Wow, no, so you see, that's a very big leap since the invention of the stored program concept, which did not have a patent. That is why, no, the moral of this, there's a good part of every bad story. The patent of the stored program concept is not a very good story. Why? Why? Because there was plagiarism there. However, the absence of patent from the stored program concept allowed private manufacturers, no, to invent and assemble their own stored program concept without any legal violation, prohibition. They're not prohibited to build because there was no patent, and because of that, no, technology prospered, and that is why we have very advanced computers nowadays. As long as open source, no, it's like an open source technology where everybody can make their own version by copying the technology without any intellectual property right violation. Okay, any questions so far? No? So these are the generations of computer. We only reach up to the 4th generation, which is the generation of microcomputers. No? 1959, the first to term it personal computer is IBM, but they did not release the PC yet in 1959. I think they released it in later no 1981 na na-release ang IBM PC. But they first attempted to call it home computer or personal computer. Now, the first microcomputer based is by Hewlett, because Hewlett Packard was producing, no, calculators in 1968. Okay, So it made a special processor which have rudimentary if-then statements. No, it's not used in computers, but it is used uh, in calculators, no? Which can have a simple assembly language inside. Okay, data point 20,000 by CTC. It's like a competitor. Uh, they made a custom TTL processor. Okay, which actually became 8008. It was originally from CTC 8008, but was later rejected because it needed 20 support chips, but was later adopted by Intel. Do you follow? Microprocessor. Microprocessor na ngayon pinag-usapan, no? Now, in 1971, HP calculators incrementally added more features, including basic programming language, which means you can now program a calculator. Okay. In 1972, 8008, which was rejected by CTC, okay, became a standard multiprocessor. It's an 8-bit multiprocessor with 16, which could address 16 KB of memory. Remember, no? The can address 40 KB. IBM 01. Now this can only address 16 KB. Okay. Okay. An agreement permitted Intel to market the chip to other customers. It was originally by CTC after Seiko. The first microcomputer is called Micral N in 1973. Okay, what is the first microcomputer? It's Micral N, produced by in France. No? Now, when this was presented to the US, no, the Apple designers were there to witness, no, the presentation. They were they served as judges. Steve Wozniak, no, MITS. It's micro instruction and telemetry systems. No? It's a company producing electronic equipments. No? Steve Wozniak was an employee, no? Okay, of MITS. Okay, the first personal computer using a microprocessor is Micral N. Okay, and the processor used is Intel 8008. Do you follow? No? The first microprocessor used in the first personal computer is Intel 8008. Okay? Now, actually first it was introduced in 1973, but 8008 appeared in the market in 1974. It's weird, no? But it's already used in 1973. Maybe they did not release it yet. No? Now, by 1974, no, Altair 800 introduced a microcomputer from MITS, no, using the Intel 8080 CPU. I think this is still an 8-bit processor, no, hindi pa 16-bit. MITS. Now, MITS is important because this is where Steve Wozniak came from. Remember Steve Wozniak? No, you have your Apple, no, devices. Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were the founders of Apple Computing. No, okay. Do you follow? So Altair ignited the microcomputer revolution. Okay, but the sad thing is Steve Wozniak went out of MITS, no? Nag-resign siya. He resigned from MITS. But before we talk about that, no? So the earliest models of Altair 800 were sold as kits to be assembled, no? You can have 256 bytes of RAM, no, very small, no? And so on and so forth, no? You can use audio cassette tapes to record data, no? Okay. In 1974, Sword Computer, now Toshiba, no? Remember what's the old name of Toshiba? Sword. No? It transferred to Japan, so it was renamed Toshiba. Okay, sold their first personal computer, also using an Intel 8008. Okay, but they later replaced it with Intel 8080, which was announced in 1974. Okay, so the microcomputers started from 1971 to 1976. There was also a company called Texas Instruments. 1976 was a turning point because in 1976, Apple released the Apple 1. And almost the same year also released the Apple 2. We'll have a separate section, no? For history of Apple. Basta 1976, umalis na si Steve Wozniak, went out of MITS. He resigned from MITS and founded his own company together with your idol Steve Jobs, no? And they assembled the first personal computer by Apple. It's called Apple 1 because the good thing about Apple, they revolutionized the graphic user interface with the mouse. Although they were not the first computers to use the mouse, but they popularized the Windows approach, no? Sila ang nagpasikat ng Windows. Okay. Now 1979, when the Apple, remember Apple was released in 1976. The first spreadsheet was launched with the Apple II. Okay. What is VC? It's called VCalc. Now it's like your modern Excel. Okay. The first spreadsheet is called VCalc. I have used this myself. This is a complete spreadsheet by Apple. I think it's still in the Mac OS. Wala na yata, no? Okay. So the first spreadsheet was 1979 in the Apple II. But in 1981, IBM PC also adopted the use of VCalc for its own personal computers because the IBM PC was released in 1981. Okay? Okay? So ang ganda ng story, no? Ng microcomputers. You have microcomputers now. Okay, this is the 4th generation microcomputers. Now let's look at the Apple computers. Can you read this yourself na lang? Remember, Steve Wozniak went out of in 1974. Steve Wozniak was working for MITS, who produced the first personal computer, went out. He resigned from MITS, worked with Steve Jobs, produced Apple in 1976. And by 1990, they had VCalc. This is the first Macintosh computer released in 1984. Okay? Oh, may mouse na siya. Look at that. If you have something like this, no, in the past, you should be a very rich kid. Because this is a graphical user interface. It's like Windows. It was 1984. Were you born there already? 1984? We already had computers like that, but can only be accessed by rich kids. I haven't used this as a student, but I have used the Apple II. Okay, this is called the Apple Lisa. No? The first computer or personal computer with a graphical interface. Although the mouse was used in the Xerox Alto before. We'll look at that. No? The first computer with the mouse is the Xerox Alto. I think it's also in the 1970s. I'm not familiar with the date. Okay. So natanggal si Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was removed from Apple in 1985. But was rehired later. In 1997, Jobs returned to Apple. And that's why you now have the mobile devices introduced by Steve Jobs. What a story they have. IBM PC is a late PC because 1970s was the generation of the microprocessors, 1971. But IBM PC came in 1981. This is the IBM PC. Now, Altair 8800, which was from MITS, was running a processor, and Zilog, no, was running a simple operating system called CPM. Initially, IBM ran their operating systems with CPM, but later they decided to switch to Microsoft because Microsoft at that time, 1970s, was producing BASIC, and then Microsoft later, I don't know how they created their own DOS. DOS was created in 1983, I think. We'll look at that. I'm not very sure of the date. So remember, the IBM PC came from Atari. Aling dito sa Atari. They did not use from scratch. You read this, this is the important part. In July 1980, before the release, 1984 pala, in July 1980, okay, they already contacted Bill Gates to work on what can be done with the IBM PC. Okay. So, however, no, wanted to create a project that will include that will package an operating system for the IBM PC. However, no, consulting gates low percentage for the machine that IBM should build. They were just proposing. However, no, IB uh, Steve Bill Gates and Paul Allen and Steve Ballmer jumped out of that project. They've decided to manufacture the operating system and the programming language, which was basic at that time. Ito, in search of the operating system. They wanted to have an operating system for the IBM PC. Okay. There was already basic, but they don't have the operating system. And then there's a sudden twist in the story when Gates went out of the project, and instead of creating an operating system for IBM, they created DOS and sold it separately. And they have agreed. Anyway, IBM was forced to market. IBM was forced to market ito, the mysterious circumstances. No? IBM was forced to market their IBM PC with a software from Microsoft, no? Which means that they were selling hardware, but the software was not theirs. Okay, unlike Apple, because Apple was selling both hardware and software. For IBM, there's a different case. Now, the hardware was IBM, the operating system was Microsoft. And Microsoft became very rich because IBM did the selling for them. Okay, do you follow? No, this is the story of IBM and Microsoft. Microsoft did not merge with IBM. They rather create their own software, and IBM has no choice because they did not have their own software. They have to sell their hardware with Microsoft software, and Microsoft became very rich because they had bigger profits. Okay. Diba may away between Apple and Microsoft? Yes, until now. Because they are competing with each other, no? Magandahan sila ng user interface. But at the start, Apple had a very good start. No? There's a competition between Apple and Microsoft. Okay? And the sad thing is, Apple at the start was very strong, but came out on the losing edge because they removed Steve Jobs. Remember, tinanggal nila si Steve Jobs, no? Pagkatanggal ni Steve Jobs, went back to Apple. When Apple lost Steve Jobs, they had very slow development. But when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, they were able to compensate by dominating the mobile market. Nowadays, the PC market is still dominated by Microsoft, but the mobile market is 79% non-Microsoft. Do you follow? Diba? Ang OS ngayon sa mga mobile, very little share. Microsoft has a very little share, no? About 20%. Okay. 1.9%. By 2020, it only holds point of all smartphones. No? But in the PC market, Microsoft is also dominating. They almost had 73% as of 2021, which means Apple still is selling Mac OS, no? And of course, the Ubuntu is still there, no? So halos pantay lang sila because because 70% of the market, a very big part of the mobile market is non-Microsoft. Okay, do you have a Windows phone? No, you don't have. Most probably you don't have. Okay, so that's the story with the IBM PC, no? It has a collaboration with Microsoft, but Microsoft, okay, benefited a lot in that collaboration, and IBM is very small nowadays, no? Meron pa ba tayong IBM na no? Computers? You don't have IBM computers anymore, not even IBM laptops. Okay? You follow? What's IBM nowadays? It's still in the It's still in the no, in the market, no? But they're not within the PC and the no. Wala na sila ngayon sa ano. They're not in the PC nor in the ano. Okay. They're still a big company, no? But they're not anymore in the PC market. Okay. Okay. So Apple computers, the computer monitor. We forgot this, no? Ito lang tatapusin natin ngayon. And then next meeting, we'll finish the whole topic on the history of the internet, the World Wide Web. The computer monitor, because what computer uses the first monitor? It's PDP1. This is wrong, no? Uniscope, it didn't say, however, that Uniscope 300 was the first, no? Because the first official computer in 1960 was using CRT display, it's the PDP1. And 1964 uses Uniscope 300. It's not a true computer monitor. But PDP1 already used because it had a game called Space War running on the monitor, no? Touchscreen was introduced and invented in 1965, but it was not used yet. Xerox Alto computer, this is 1973. The first computer with a mouse, no? Xerox Alto computer in 1973. The first computer using a mouse. Okay. With a monochrome display. Okay, let's look at the Xerox Alto computer. 1973 no, may mouse na. Xerox Alto. There it is, no? It looks like the Apple. Parang Apple, pero this is the mouse, oh. How it looks like, it has 3 buttons. We still have, yes, we have 3 buttons, no? That's the Xerox Alto computer, the first computer with a mouse. Okay, will you still work with a mouse like this? I think I've seen this, no? Mouse like this in one of the labs before, no? If you have a mouse like this, you give it to me because you can keep it as a legacy item. First mouse, no? So may trackball ito it has a trackball. It has a trackball at the bottom, okay? So it has a mouse because it has a graphical user interface, no? Okay. So nag-migrate din pala ito. This migrated to the Apple computer. Okay. So that's a mouse, oh. That's the Alto mouse. It's a serial device. Look at the serial port. It's like a VGA. And they also have a trackball themselves. What's this? And there's a key set, no? So Xerox Alto in 1973 is the first computer with a mouse. Okay. Saan na tayo? So 1975, first resistance touch display. So you have a touch screen. The first is Apple 1976, the first spreadsheet. So video output was first introduced in 1976 in the Apple I, which means you can use your TV to be the output of your computer. Okay, video output the output, the video jack, which has a red and white, no, RCA jack. If you don't, you Google that yourself, no? In 1977, LED was invented. Okay. They were not yet used in the PC market, but they were already used in calculators, right? Wow, in 1977, Apple II released the first color display, okay, on a CRT monitor. 1977 colored. This must be very expensive, okay? First computer with a color monitor, let's see, is it Apple II? Yes, that's correct. Apple II. Okay, can you take note of that? What computer has the first color monitor? Apple II, 1977. Very expensive. Okay. 1987, IBM released the VGA. VGA now has 480 technology because the standard was 360. Ngayon, 480 yung resolution. Okay, let's look at the VGA resolution. Original VGA resolution. 480, 640 by 480. That's the original VGA resolution. That's already considered very fine at that time. 680 by 480. Then you will have the next of to this is HD. HD is 720. And then you will have full HD, which is 1020. 1080, I'm sorry. 1080. And now you have 2K, 2048. And then you have 4K, which is 4096. Okay? Do you follow? So, no? Bilis, no? It's too quick. No? Remember, VGA was first released by IBM in 1987. The resolution is 640 by 480. 1980s color CRTs were replaced by HD na, no? 1980s yung first HD, 1024 by 768. HD, high density. Kasi yung 480 is not high density. Okay. Manufactured, no? LCD was manufactured in mid-1990s, 1995. 1997, Apple, IBM, ViewSonic released LCD monitors, colored LCD monitors. 1997. Were you born already? 1997? Were you there already? Colored na yung LCD monitors. 1998, first affordable LCD monitor. 1998. LCD pa, no? By 2004 at 2003, LCD monitors outsold CRT monitors. So CRT were gone by 2003. Yes, but I have the last TV I have for a CRT was 2010. So I cannot afford an LCD TV by 2010. It's very expensive. Nowadays, an LCD TV is like your personal computer. Touch screen LCD was introduced in 2006. You were there already, right? Touch screen. 2009, LED na. 2009, this was the introduction of LED monitors, which paved the way for higher resolution. Okay. They were phasing out the support for VGA. 2010, but VGA is still here. They were being phased out by IBM and Intel. But until now, VGA is still here. I still have a VGA laptop. HDMI na ngayon, di ba? Now HDMI and Dev-I. 2017 LCD touchscreen LCD monitors were priced lower. Okay. What was the first computer with a monitor? It's PDP1. What's the first computer with a colored monitor? It's the Apple II. 1977. The first computer with a VGA monitor? It's an IBM PC. No, 1987. Okay. First VGA monitor, 1987. That's the time I graduated college. VGA. And Apple II, first color monitor. Wow. Okay. Any questions so far? I hope you're enjoying that. The IBM PC, you read this, no? We have gone through this, you read this yourself. And then next meeting, we will look at another interesting topic. Microsoft Windows, no? We look at Microsoft Windows na lang ngayon. Madali lang ito, kayo na lang magbasa nito. Okay? Basta DOS came in 1981 for the IBM PC. That's when Bill Gates, no, distanced himself from Microsoft. They didn't want to, rather from IBM. They didn't want to join IBM. No? They were invited by IBM to join in a project, but they bolted out of the project. They said, we're just going to make DOS and IBM PC. And then the good thing about this is even other manufacturers were able to use Microsoft DOS. Do you follow? Unlike in the case of Apple, no, the Apple operating system, it started also from CPM, cannot be used by other manufacturers. So there were late Apple clones. No? There were Apple clones. No? So MS-DOS, the first operating system was in 1981 for an IBM PC. Because during 1970s, I think it's 1974, 1976, no? Microsoft was producing BASIC. They were a very small company. All their only product is BASIC. When did they release Microsoft Office? You find that out. No? 1992 was the first. The very popular Windows was 1990 to 1994. Windows 3.0. It's a 16-bit Windows. No? Very popular because it lasted 5 years without having remember you have Windows almost 5 years, no? 1994 to 1992, 5 years, no? Remember 5 years of Windows? Do you have 5 years? Every 2 years you have a new version of Windows at most, no? So if you look at the earlier versions of Windows, they look like the Mac OS interface, no? Look at that. It's really like a Mac OS, no? They follow. The only difference is the Mac had a taskbar at the top. Okay, let's look for that now. May ano ba siyang mga taskbar? Okay, and we have more pictures of the Windows 3.0. I've used this myself. No? I've used this myself for a long time. When was the first paint? No, meron pa tayong isang tandaan. First paint program. We missed this out, no? Paint did not come from Microsoft. I look it up myself. No? The paint you have came out from Apple. It came from Apple. So Windows 3.11 is Windows 95. It's a very popular Windows because it's a 32-bit Windows. And later, 1993, there's also Windows 3.1 to 4.0. It's a server-based OS used to compete with Novell at that time. No? File sharing was the trend. You need to share files in a network. No? Windows 98 was very popular. Okay. It was a 32-bit version. No. Yes, 32-bit version. Windows ME, I've used this. Windows 2000 and Windows XP. The first 64-bit Windows with a 64-bit version. Okay? Meron ng game sa PC dyan. Of course, no? Because the first game was in 1960. Remember, no? The first game came on a computer. What's the first game called? I played this on the Apple. On the Apple, it's called Space Commander. No, but the original game was Space War, 1961, 1960, and 1961. Okay, the first game came in 1961. It's called Space War. No, you're going to shoot aliens in space. Kill as many aliens you need to kill, and then if otherwise they'll eat you up. Okay, when they come close to you, they'll eat you up. That's how you play Space War. Kill as many aliens, shoot as many aliens. Okay. Okay. XP, the first 64-bit. Windows Vista did not sell. Windows 7 is a very popular replacement of Vista. I still have my Windows 7. Windows 8, we now have Windows 10. I didn't like Windows 8. Windows 11 is going to be released soon. Okay. Linux. Hindi na tayo Linux. History of Linux. I like my Ubuntu. I have an Ubuntu PC. I'll just include material on the history of Unix and Linux. Okay, that's another important part. Okay, and then our last topic will be the history of internet. Okay, we'll do that next meeting. So MS-DOS came in 1981, no, for the IBM PC. It resembled CPM, which is the OS running in Apple, no, and Zilog. Nandyan, history of Microsoft Windows. Problema lang dito, it did not include the history of Microsoft Office. Okay? But anyway, VisiCalc came in what? In Apple 2, no? Ang Apple 2 is 1976 eh. So 1981 VisiCalc, no? VisiCalc. Let's make sure of that. I'm not sure. 1979 pala, I'm sorry, no? Some say it's 1971, but VisiCalc is 1979. Here's how it looks. Okay, so ganyan. Okay? Look at that. This is not your this is not your Excel, no? But this is VisiCalc, but it looks like Excel because Excel is patterned after this, no? Okay, I've used Lotus 123 before. This is like what VisiCalc is, no? 1979, the first worksheet. When is the first word processor? Natin yan nasali, no? 1976. Okay, first word processing. This different machine, word processor software. WordStar, okay? Have you used this? 1976. WordStar, you tell your mom. WordStar and Lotus 123. Okay. I've used this, no? In my thesis, I finished my thesis in 1990. Before, there's no Windows. WordStar, no? The first word processor is WordStar. The first spreadsheet is VisiCalc. Okay, bright kayo sila, no? Imagine you're going to have this. Okay. 1976 din yung WordStar. 1976, oh. You follow? First spreadsheet is 1979. VisiCalc, oh. 1979. Okay. But first word processor is 1976. Okay. Do you follow? Meron ng games. There's a lot of games already in the IBM PC. In the microprocessor, it's Apple pa lang, daming games. No? Everything is games in the Apple. I've spent hours in the Ateneo lab doing nothing but playing games. The Ateneo lab was there in the Canisius. Okay, the old Canisius, the 5th floor. There, I was there. They have about 50 computers, no? Zilog, there's a Zilog computer, there's an Apple computer, no? There are a few IBM PCs, no? When you happen to look at Canisius, you go there, no? The 5th floor is the original computer lab. Any questions so far? So I'll give you over the weekend a practice test so that by August 25 you will have your first formative test. Okay? August 25 and 26, that will be the big day for your first formative test. Okay? Any questions so far? No? Okay. See you next meeting. Guys, thanks for coming. Did I miss anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. No?
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Bye,
sir.
everyone.
Permanent